Welcome back, Jimmy at the Crossroads. Jimmy Sengenberger here with you in partnership with the Washington Examiner, and we are at the leadership program of the Rockies 2021 retreat here at the Broadmoor Hotel in Colorado Springs. And today is about saving freedom 1776, and this is a battle that's going on across the United States and, of course, around the globe. And I am so pleased to be joined here today by someone who knows all about the fight for liberty in Latin America. Gloria Alvarez joins us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. And I'm going to just ask her to tell us a little bit about herself. But first, welcome to the show. It's good to have you. Bienvenidos.
Thank you, Jimmy. Muchas gracias. It's a pleasure to be here with your audience.
Come on, Jimmy. What you got?
So fantastic to have you. I just want to go to the beginning because we have a similar track of having started radio as teenagers. Now, me, it was college radio. You were doing music radio. Tell us about yourself.
Oh, well, I was doing college in a libertarian university that I didn't choose because of libertarian ideas. It just happened to be the only university in Guatemala offering international affairs. And I fell in love with the curriculum. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I was like, if I study what I really like, something will happen. And then on the second year of college, sophomore that you call, I had some friends in a band, and the father of one of them was bringing a new music radio to Guatemala. But he didn't want like the typical broadcaster. He wanted people with different contents. So he was looking for people studying psychology, medicine, stuff like that, and they offered me the job. And it was perfect because I could study and then, 3 hours on air. And without me knowing it, that was wiring my brain into a way where I could explain very complicated ideas in simple examples, right? And then when I graduated, I went abroad through scholarships, studying international development. I had the fantasy of getting inside the World Bank or the IMF or the UN and explain to them that it was trade, not aid, what really helps. Of course, in that road, I understood, no, they are not interested in hearing that because it's an industry perpetuating poverty, right? Like the whole thing of aid is not getting people out of poverty so they can stay there. So I went back to Guatemala. I was super frustrated. I studied all of these things, political science, international development, master's degree, and I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to go into a political party. I didn't want to get involved in an NGO. I thought of all of it as something that was just perpetuating underdevelopment. So I went back to the radio. And this time, my boss, this was another music station, way more prestigious than the one that I started with. He said to me, you have all this, knowledge. I want that on air. And I said to him, well, that's going to create trouble, because I'm a libertarian and people don't like free markets and free individuals. And he said, I don't care. So what I started doing in the show was explaining to young people what I knew best, and that was getting scholarships online. And I said to them, well, listen, the government is just not interested in educating you. It's just not, because, the dumber you are, the cheaper your boat. So if you want to get out of that trap, you can use the internet and put your education in your own hands. And I have scholarships here. So I would go online and see, advertisement scholarship in Madrid, or Singapore offering a tech scholarship to do some masters or whatever. And then my show just skyrocketed in ratings. And it was amazing because while my colleagues were talking about, Hollywood gossip in that moment, like the Kardashians or what was going on with Lindsay Lohan and Britney Spears, I was offering alternatives, and that opened the space until the point that through that music station, I interviewed political candidates in Guatemala. We started doing activism, so it was pretty cool.
So when you were on the radio specifically trying to take a music show and make it more about issues of the day that impact people's real lives, what was it that you really tried to use in terms of strategies to personalize it and make it relatable to people for a music station so that they weren't turning away while they were maybe wanting to go for music and hear a little bit about gossip?
Right, so first of all, understanding who's your audience. My audience was high school kids and college kids. That what I understand now is that people are not going to bet for freedom if they are too afraid to be free. And what we have in Latin America is psychological damages in self-esteem. People are taught since they're kids that they're victims. Victims of the United States, victims of the Spanish conquistador, victims of the oligarchies, victims in a way that it doesn't matter how much they work hard, they won't get up in the ladder of progress. So if you have people with a damaged self-esteem, it doesn't matter how much you talk about free market economics, they're just gonna be like, I don't want this.
Right.
So I went back to another level, and that's emotional intelligence and psychology. And I would be going to topics like, for example, the way that I would sell the fountainhead of Ayn Rand to them. I was like, guys, do you want to study something that your parents would kill you if you study? Like maybe you want to be an astronaut or a chef, but your parents want you to be a doctor or a lawyer, which is like the very, conservative way of thinking about school. And I would say like, well, I have this fantastic book, and it was about this architect who get bullied because he wanted to make these amazing modern buildings. So if you want good arguments in order to stand up for yourself, I have this amazing book called The Fountainhead by Ayn Rand. I wouldn't mention the buzzwords like private property, capitalism, all those things that people would be like, hell no. Like I would sell the product from another angle. And it was very efficient. Actually, because of that work, then I started getting other job offers. I worked in a bank as a social media manager. I worked for a cell phone company. And that's how I started understanding that technology is doing in Latin America what the governments will never do, educating and empowering people.
So one thing that is a big struggle for conservatives, libertarians here in the United States today is exactly what you were talking about in terms of personalization and making it relatable in a way that can get them thinking, okay, this has an impact on my life, but also the language aspect that you're underscoring, not saying things that can instantly turn somebody off because there's certain terminology that's being used. What advice would you give to American media folks like myself or to elected officials or candidates who are trying to shrink the size and scope of government, focus on individual liberty and free markets, to do that in an effective way and bring in this next generation of Generation Z or our generation of millennials into the fold?
Well, there are various strategies that involve thinking outside the box and not making the battle in the stage that they put for you, but make your own stage. So I'll give you 3 examples. With feminism, for example, right? Original feminists were actually very libertarian in the sense that they didn't want privileges from the government or subsidies. They just wanted to have the right to work, to acquire private property, to open a bank account, like to be treated equally, right? And now feminists are like, oh, the patriarchy is horrible, but they want to submit women to the most inefficient and corrupt daddy of them all, which is daddy government. So when you say just that, it's like you can see the shock in their heads. The other thing with racism, what has been very efficient for me to use is DNA tests. I actually did my own DNA test, and it turns out that I have Native American, African, Scandinavian. And when I'm seeing all these divisions of race, I say, listen, if everybody would get their DNA, they would all see that we're all genetic blenders. It's stupid to be judging and dividing us by the color of our skin, which doesn't even represent what's going on in our genetic ladder, right? So when you introduce things like that, it's like, what? Like no one expects that. And I think that conservatives and libertarians sometimes are afraid to think outside the box and come out with strategies that are maybe too exaggerated, but they are very efficient. The other thing I was talking yesterday when I was coming in, and this is a 3rd example that I give you, is the hypocrisy, right? The hypocrisy of Latin Americans and also Californians. Let me put you in parallel, right? Latin Americans and Californians have consistently voted for socialist strategies, right? Let's embrace the poor. Let's get free stuff. Let's embrace the homeless because we care and we have this solidarity. Great, perfect. Turns out that when you invest in these policies, misery, scarcity, hyperinflation, poverty starts arising. What do Latin Americans do? They migrate to the United States. What are Californians doing? Going to Texas and going to Colorado.
Colorado, I was just going
Okay.
to say that, absolutely.
So the thing is, if you're moving, don't bring the disgrace with you. Otherwise, stay there and live according to the socialist policies that you chose. But the hypocrisy is, they choose this, they create a disaster, then they move to freer parts of the world, and they pretend to establish the same thing. And it's like, no. And if that's gonna be the case, then let's divide.
I sort of compare that idea that you're expressing to like a plague of locusts that goes to one place, eats everything up there, and then moves on to the next one, and doesn't recognize that what they're doing is creating the exact same problems that they were dealing with before. And so something that always comes to my mind when we're discussing how to express ideas of liberty is also through stories. And talking about how people experience certain things. I mean, you've got Hungarian background and Cuban because between the two of your parents. And so finally, as we wrap up here, what can you tell us about storytelling and the power of that?
It's super powerful. In fact, I quote in some of my conferences Tyrion Lannister from Game of Thrones and the power of stories, and I use Star Wars and I use Matrix, and in my
love
books,
the Star Wars. I do that too.
Yeah, like I try to use everything that art has to offer to teach lessons about freedom, especially to a generation that doesn't like to read. Maybe not everybody's gonna read Human Action by Ludwig von Mises or Atlas Shrugged because they're like thousands of pages, but there are stories, and this is the thing. Neuroscience is teaching us that if an idea it's not backed with an emotion, the idea doesn't stick. And that is what the left does very efficiently. They talk about emotions regardless of the data. And if you only stick to the data, I wish it would be as easy as showing a picture of Korea. And you know, there's electricity in South Korea, there's none in North Korea. You see, it doesn't work. I wish it would be that easy. But you have to attach emotions to the data.
That's so well. It's been said, facts don't care about your feelings. Somebody says that.
Yeah.
Feelings don't care about your facts. You got to bring the two things together.
Exactly.
Gloria Alvarez, we're out of time, but thank you so much.
No,
Let's keep
thank
in
you.
touch. This was such a treat.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.